Live. Thank you for joining us today on Reasoned Answers. My channel aims to provide deep theological discussion as it relates to the intersection of Christianity and Islam. And that's what we have today. We have some very in-depth research from Lloyd looking at the origins of Islam. We're told this story that, Islam was founded by Muhammad. Everything came from him. He supposedly had these revelations and he was passing them on. And then when we look at actual history, we see a very different picture. We see a political system that developed slowly over a period of time and then added religious elements later on. A lot of people are looking into this area. Most of them are focusing on influences to the north. We agree that Islam has many influences that come from north of where it supposedly originated in Arabia, in Mecca and Medina, much further north in Jerusalem and Syria and Iraq, and even further north than that. However, what people are not looking at is the southern influences of Islam. So we're not offering an alternate theory, we're offering a supplemental theory, some additional information that needs to be taken into account as we all look at this giant puzzle of how Islam came to be. Let me open us with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for the technology that allows us to connect with fellow Christians, but also with Muslims and people with no particular religious belief. We ask that everyone who is watching today, whatever their religious background, approach the material with an open mind. They don't simply dismiss it because they don't like what they hear. We ask that you be with us today, that you guide our discussion, and that you ensure that whatever we say is true is remembered, and whatever we say that is not true is simply forgotten. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. So some of you may have seen our first video on this subject where we looked at a number of things, but especially looking at the city that supposedly existed that is now known as Mecca. It's supposedly the oldest city in the world according to Islamic belief, and we see no evidence that it existed in its modern location anyway before the 7th century. So we're looking at how the southern influences can explain that. We'll review that material a little, but I did want to say that we got some pushback from a Muslim who goes by the name Alonzo Harris. He tried to insist that a particular article, scholarly article, that was attempting to reconstruct Ptolemy's geography, that work had concluded that Mecca was in fact where it was. I looked into that work and found that the authors, what they did is they applied a mathematical model to unknown points. However, one of the starting quote unquote known points was Mecca. Therefore, their paper did not draw any conclusion whatsoever about where Mecca was located. They just said if Mecca is correctly identified, then this is where other cities would be. And that wasn't the only starting point. They had, a couple dozen known starting points. But the point being that his argument didn't work. So then he decided to challenge us to a debate. And I don't do debates, but Lloyd entertained him for a bit. And you want to tell the people how that went, Lloyd?
Yeah, short version. So, hi everyone. Thanks for having me here again, Thaddeus. Good to be back with you. So, about a year ago, Alonzo was making a lot of noise. So I told him, Alonzo, you've made claims. Please come on my channel. I will give you the floor. You can speak as much as you want. Take all the time you need. Present your evidence. Show me why I am wrong. He then proceeded for weeks. Now, I made dozens, and I mean literally dozens of invitations to him. He then made every single excuse in the book, and eventually I involved Ask Truth. He then made dozens of excuses, and a year later with Thaddeus, he made plenty, excuse after excuse to avoid meeting with us, and eventually he refused. We then accommodated him. We said, okay, fine. So don't do a presentation. We'll do your debate. We named some terms. We asked him to name terms. He failed to name terms. We presented terms. He accepted the terms and then said, oh, wait, by the way, I changed the terms. And then he said, oh, I always had these terms. And we showed him his own comments. It was an entire mess. He kept changing the rules, changing everything he'd said, changing the terms. We accommodated every request he had, and we still haven't had a debate. And I've been down this road for months with this guy and with numerous others. So yeah, we've got nowhere, and he fails to provide evidence. We are simply asking him. And then of course his final objection was, well, okay, great, then we're going to do this using only Arabic sources. And sadly, not everyone in the world speaks Arabic. As you know, only about well, yeah. Also, Alonso deleted more than once now, 3 times in the last week, has deleted his thread after being schooled. And of course, now remember, I invited him. He turned me down dozens of times, right? He's the one who has failed to make terms. He's the one who has failed to appear. He is the one who has run away, deleted his threads. But I'm the one who is, we've accommodated every request of his. And he's had nothing but excuses, insults, and, just ran away. Your thoughts?
Yeah,
That
absolutely. Alonzo here says that we're scared, but I think Villainous has a slightly more plausible explanation. He says this sort of stuff is designed to distract. You must be getting too close to the truth.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable.
As you can see, I have not blocked Alonzo. He's right here in the chat. For now, if this behavior continues, him wasting our time and then deleting the thread to remove all the work and that people did into refuting him, well, then I guess I'll just have to save him some time. If he's going to delete his thread, I might as well just delete it from the start, right? So we'll give him another chance, but he may not be on this
here's the
channel much
thing.
longer.
Alonso has made claims on our channels. We have no need to entertain him, none whatsoever. He has made claims. He said that our claims are false, or my claims are false. I have offered him on multiple channels, on dozens of occasions, the opportunity to come on, present his evidence, to bring his evidence, to present it. He will have the floor. He will have the choice of his moderator. We've offered Thaddeus and asked Truth. He doesn't, for some reason, no one is good enough. But we've said, look, here's the floor. Present your evidence. We are happy to let you speak as long as you want. We'll ask you questions. You take questions. You present because you've made claims. Now, please present. Now, I don't see how that is not fair. There's nothing to debate here. Present your evidence. And he fails to do so. He is frightened, scared of presenting evidence. And your last video was about evidence, that is.
Indeed. And he deleted a thread on that one too. So I guess he is
3
not
times
interested
in 1 week now.
He's not interested in having his debate stay out there once he's done with it. Then he just deletes it. So seems to me he's just trying to waste time. But for now, he's still around. And he just keeps saying in the chat over and over that you're scared, blah, blah, blah. Alonzo, if you want to provide some evidence that what we say today is wrong in real time, you're welcome to do so. But we're not going to entertain your attempts to bait us by saying you're scared and so on. So you want to dive into our actual presentation now?
Right. Yes, let's do that without further distraction from the peanut gallery. All right. So I want to do a short update. So maybe I should share my screen.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll just share my my second screen. Okay, so there's a couple of slides I want to share with you guys. One, we were discussing the southern influences on Islam, influences from prior to obviously the arrival of Islam. So specifically within Yemen and Ethiopia today, I will discuss Ethiopia. I will also discuss influences within Arabia from the north. So we'll start to look at where we can tie these two together, right? Because obviously there's some sort of overlap here. And I don't know if we'll have an opportunity to get into Ethiopia very much. But remember, we discussed Abraham a couple of times. We discussed Abraham in the previous discussion, and we also introduced the concept of pillars, these tall pillars, which were part and parcel of religion in the Jahiliyyah, the time, the ignorance, the period of ignorance before Islam, or the condition of ignorance prior to Islam, which was common in both Yemen and Ethiopia, both of whom were major trading empires, both of whom were dominant in Arabia at various times. Now, in Genesis, Abraham and his descendants worship in a manner that includes mention of trees and pillars. So we can find this, there are numerous references, but in this book I'm using here, this book is Israelite Religions, an Archaeological and Biblical Survey by Richard Hess. Deuteroscopy. I, I always see deuteroscopy after the boom boom room. I can only see deuteroscopy. That was one of the funniest things ever. 16:21-22. You shall not plant for yourself any tree as a wooden image near the altar which you build for yourself to the Lord your God. You shall not set up a sacred pillar which your Lord God hates. In a different translation, and do not set up holy stone pillars. The Lord God hates them. So this is a direct reference to pillar worship, which we discovered was part and parcel of the pre-Islamic situation in both Yemen and Arabia. They worshipped pillars. Your thoughts, Thaddeus?
Yeah, Lloyd pointed this out to me, so I did some research. The Hebrew term that's being translated as pillar here, it seems to be a fairly technical term used to describe pillars used in religious practices. So it's not just like a generic pillar that, you know, holds up the corner of the building or something. It's specifically referring to the kind of stone structures that represented gods that Lloyd showed some pictures of last week.
Yeah, right. Just a point of interest from this book, Genesis and Exodus. It says here, if patriarchal religion corresponds to some kind of historical reality, then, and here's the fun bit, presumably this is either some form of genuinely ancient pre-Yahwistic religion, so a religion before the worship of Yahweh, right, the God of the Jews, the God of the Old Testament, or something that was an unorthodox strand within Yahwistic religion, e.g., prior to Josiah's reforms. And they state here the difficulty with the latter suggestion, that this is an offshoot from the worship of Yahweh, is precisely the complete lack of that holiness and exclusivity, the exclusiveness, which is one of the most fundamental characteristics of Yahwism, right? So the worship of God has a certain very clear definition about it, and they're stating that there must have been some kind of ancient pre-Yahweh religion. So that's the conclusion here. Just bear that in mind, all right? So now I'm going to skip forward. Now we spoke about Ur in Iraq or Turkey, right? We spoke about the location of Ur. Now, just to highlight, there was more than one Ur, right? So there were numerous Urs all over the place, especially around the area in the north of the northeastern Iraq, Turkey, the Mediterranean coast of Syria, and so on, right? So there were numerous Urs, most of them clustered around from Haran up north and west, right? And the Turkish government, oddly, has denied excavation in Haran by archaeologists. This would actually be very helpful in determining some religious facts, you know, looking at the Bible. But for some reason, they've denied any excavation in that area. Now, so I'm going to skip this. This we can cover another time in depth. Now, I also mentioned Gobekli Tepe, right? Now, we all know about Gobekli Tepe as the oldest religious site in the world. It turns out, apparently, it is not. It is within about 12 kilometers of Haran. This is from a newspaper report on the excavations from the Gobekli Tepe team, and you'll see there are numerous related sites related to just like Gobekli Tepe. Some are smaller, but Gobekli Tepe was the main site, and there's a bunch of these sites. So there wasn't just one. In fact, one report said there were dozens of sites like it. So Kur Tepe, Karahan Tepe, and in fact, one of these is known to be older than Gobekli Tepe, actually older. This is from the blog of the team that manages Gobekli Tepe, and you can see there's well over a dozen sites here. Now, just a thought on this, just something to ponder, is that Abraham is from Ur. Ur is, well, Haran, right? Abraham, the Bible mentions Abraham and Haran. Haran is 12 kilometers from Gobekli Tepe. Now, there was knowledge in that region of an extremely old civilization. Now, I think we've got a date mismatch here because obviously Abraham comes well after. But if Muhammad and his cronies were looking for the proto-religion, the religion of Abraham, they might well have known about these sites within legend. I mean, there's as I said, there's at least a dozen sites here, 15 of them or something like that. They might well have decided to connect this proto-religion before Judaism with Abraham, saying, well, Abraham's the patriarch, and here we've got this old religion, and boom, there you go. This is the religion of Abraham. Just my thoughts. Your thoughts, Thaddeus?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's nothing like definitive here, but the
No.
fact that Abraham was apparently living near this site of uh,
Yep.
religious heritage from long before his time, it does provide an interesting piece to look at. And of course, Muslims will tell us that Abraham built the Kaaba and built a temple as the
The
first
oldest temple
structure.
in the world. Yes.
And here we have an area that, at least now, is known for the oldest temples in the world.
The world.
So
Correct.
it lines up. Whether Muhammad could have known about this, that's open to debate, but it does line up. It does provide an interesting correlation.
Yeah. This was
And of
probably
course,
known
it's
within
nowhere
that region.
near Mecca.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true. It's very far north of Mecca. All right. So now I will jump forward. Okay. And we will get back to where we were going. So just to run through Macoraba. We need to get back to Macoraba, and we'll discuss the where, and then we'll discuss the what. Right. So, hi guys. Hi, welcome everyone that's here today. Now, Macoraba. We mentioned Macoraba the where. Now, Macoraba is one of the locations that Muslims want to assert and claim is Mecca, and it's identified supposedly by the oldest temple isn't the Kaaba. No, it is not, villainous. And we know there's even a temple now, apparently older than Gobekli Tepe, built prior to Gobekli Tepe. And one of dozens such sites in the region. And now, Macoraba as a site, Muslims assert, is Mecca. This is based upon supposedly the records of Ptolemy from the 2nd century. We debunked that 2 weeks ago by showing that Ptolemy never made the claim that Macoraba was Mecca. He never linked it to. That was made by a supposed map maker in 1646, a man called Borkut, who made this claim in 1646. And all of the claims that Mecca is Macoraba and Macoraba is Mecca date from that reference in the middle 1600s, not from the 2nd century. That is?
Well, Alonzo here says it's not Muslims that make that claim, but the consensus of scholarship. Well, bad news, Alonzo, that consensus is changing. It's been started to be doubted in the last 10 years, and a lot of people are now saying, yeah, that this link isn't very strong after all. Sorry, buddy.
Correct. So we're going to go into what Ptolemy actually did say. We will have a look at that. Now, we do know that when we don't assume that Mecca is in the right place and then make the rest of the map fit around it by fiddling and jiggling everything into place, we are aware that what happens is let's get to the map. I will jump to the map. This is Mecca. This is Macoraba, according to Ptolemy's map, right? And of course, we do know that once we put everything in the correct place, Macoraba ends up in Yemen, Mahabisha, rather close to the old capital of the old Yemeni kingdom, which the worshippers of stone, but the Sabaeans. And there were multiple major temples. There were 3 major sites in this region that were centers of pilgrimage for the old Yemeni religion, the Sabaean religion, the one with the stone pillars. So Mahabisha is Macoraba, and it's in Yemen, in the south, close to Sana'a, and close to these major sites of pilgrimage. Right, so let me go back up. So as a refresher then, so Macoraba, according to Ptolemy, is a city in northwestern Arabia, Felix, right? So Ptolemy's 2nd century geography places the name Macoraba in the west of the Arabian Peninsula. Now, he was a Greek writer who wrote the Guide to Drawing the Earth, which listed latitude and longitude for cities, mountains, and other major geographical features. Of course, his system isn't compatible with ours, so Dan Gibson was able to discover how the system worked and then remapped all the points, right? Now, the first instance was this Borkut in 1646. This is the first instance where Macoraba was identified with Mecca. So this is the first claim of that nature. Now, I'll skip this again. So I think we've covered that. Is that sufficient? Do you think that is, just to bring people up to speed?
If people didn't see the first episode and they're not quite
I'll have to look
sure,
at it. Yeah.
go back and look at that, because we talk about the evidence extensively there. We just wanted to briefly review it so that you have a grounding for what we'll talk about today.
Okay, so for instance, this is an old map based on Ptolemy's design. And you can see Italy here, which looks nothing like Italy, and you can see this is all completely wrong, right? So this is the accuracy of these old maps contrasted with a new map, and you can see this is completely different. Right. So continuing. Okay, so now we're going to speak about Saba. So back to Yemen, to the Sabae and the Bible. Yes, that is a comment.
So Alonzo jumped in here and he said that Lloyd questions Macoraba, but accepts that Abraham existed. LOL. Abraham didn't exist according to his own methodology. What methodology would that be exactly? How does taking the plots that Ptolemy said and reconstructing them into a modern geography have anything to do with the existence of Abraham? Do try to actually think before making comments next time.
Right. Well, his whole intent is to distract us and to cause disruption, which we should avoid. Now, the Sabae, there are people in the ancient kingdom known from local inscriptions as Saba, or Saba, also known as Sheba, situated in southwestern Yemen. Now, Saba is a well-known historical kingdom. It's attested even in Assyrian sources. For instance, in the annals of this guy, to whom the Saba Aja paid homage with gifts in about 730 BC. Then in the annals of Sargon II in 715, the Sabaean Tamara is mentioned as bringing tribute. Then in an inscription of Sennacherib, according to which in 685 a man called Karabili sent gifts. This Karabili, make a note of that, that's why it's highlighted. Now, we should note that Sennacherib, I believe is mentioned in the Bible. It actually means that the moon god Sin has replaced the brothers, discussed in 2 Kings 18. So the moon god Sin has replaced the brothers. The brothers, I believe. Oops, sorry, the wind just blew a. Right. So Sin has replaced the brothers. The brothers apparently being 2 previous gods, and now Sin has achieved dominance over those 2 gods. Right. Now, this kingdom of Saba, the Sabaean kingdom, fell after civil war between several Yemenite dynasties, all claiming kingship, and they split into several territories. The Himmerite kingdom arose as victors. Now, this kingdom were traders. They mentioned in Jeremiah and in Ezekiel. In Job 1:15, they are described as a rival nation of Israel due to religious differences. So they were antagonistic enemies of Israel. In Isaiah 45:14, he describes them as a people of great physique. In Job 1:12-15, we see that the Sabaeans are used by Satan to attack and enslave Job's family after killing their servants. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. There was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house, and there came a messenger unto Job and said, The oxen were plying and the asses feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them, took them away. They have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and only I am escaped to tell thee. So the Sabaeans are enemies of the Jews. Comment?
Nope.
Right. Now, the Sabaeans, remember we discussed at length in the previous show how the Sabaeans are believed to be Muslims. So according to Islamic scholar Muhammad Shukri al-Alusi, who compared the Islamic religion to that of the Sabaeans, and he found numerous parallels. They were identical in numerous ways. So in other words, you've got a pre-existing pagan religion that had exact practices to which that Islam has. So these practices predated Islam, and Islam copied these exact pagan practices from the Sabaeans. In his writings, he compared the two beliefs, and they are similar in most practices. We covered that previously. Now, the Sabaeans were practitioners, and remember, Muhammad is looking for the original religion of Abraham. So the Sabaeans were practitioners of many elements of the religion of Abraham, because Islam is the religion of Abraham. The Sabaeans were very much similar, almost identical to Islam. So therefore, they were also practitioners of the religion of Abraham, with obviously the modifications Muhammad made to set himself apart. Your thoughts, Thaddeus?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that they saw this existing people and wanted to attribute them to being Muslims because they had absorbed a lot of the practices of this group.
Yes.
But of course, that's projected back onto history. That's not a historical reality at all. More, it's first the religion of Islam was formed. It adopted practices from a bunch of places, and then it's like, oh, look, we can look back in history and see that people did similar things to what we do. They must have also been Muslims. But of course, the Sabaeans never called themselves Muslims or anything like that.
Correct. And it seems that I'm looking at something that says that the term Muslim and Islam sort of arose only in the 9th century. I mean, this arose very late. Prior to that, they were just believers. We're going to look into that today. So the Sabaeans, some historical context. They carried out trade by land and by sea, leading to massive growth from the 18th century BC onwards. They had colonies along the Red Sea and in Ethiopia. They had an extremely lucrative spice trade, especially frankincense and myrrh. Now, they lived in the land of Sheba as regional monarchies, and the first king was Karab al-Bayin. He ruled from 700 to 800 BC. So Sabaeans worship the stars, the wandering planets. This in Islam with the circling of the Kaaba 7 times. Yes, we'll get into more of that in a minute. So the first thing was Karab al-Bayin, Karab el, right? Look at the root word here, KRB and EL, right? This is all going to be. So we mentioned Karabeli earlier, and he was also known as Karibi Ilu, and he was a Mukarrab of Saba, and he reigned in 700 to 680 BC. The name Karibi Ilu in Akkadian matches Karab al-Bayin in Sabaean, which is combined of Karib el, which means one who carries out the instructions of El, one who carries out the instructions of Allah, of God, and of Ben, one who removes punishment. Now, a Muslim is one who obeys and follows the law of Allah, the will of Allah. And Ben, now these guys are in Yemen. Notice, and this will be relevant later as we cover more of this, that when you look at the Kaaba, there are various hadith that state that Muhammad would touch the Yemeni corner of the Kaaba. And he stated that anyone who touches the Yemeni corner would have his sins removed. And therefore, you would escape the punishment of the hellfire. So touching the Yemeni corner would absolve you of sin. And here you've got this Karab al-Bayin. This is a title, I think. I don't think it's a name. And he removes punishment because he's 2 things. 1, he's a priest, and 2, he is a king. Your thoughts, Thaddeus, before I go
on? No particular thoughts come to mind at this point.
Okay. So now, the Sabaeans lived in the land of Sheba, as you know, and this is best known in the context of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. We're not going to dwell on that. Now, various writers have also cited the story of Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, from the Assyrians to the Greeks and the Romans in the 8th century. And Saba is mentioned twice in the Quran, in Quran 27 and 34, as the people of Tubba, Count Tubba, in Quran 44 and Quran chapter 50, right? So the Sabaeans are well known in the Quran. They're known in the Bible too. So now we'll circle back to that. So let's look at the word Miqrab, and Macoraba. So this is the what. Now, outside of the standard Islamic narrative, literally nothing is known of the history of the Kaaba. Now, the only reason for presuming the Kaaba was in existence in the 2nd century AD is the mention of Mecca as Macoraba by Ptolemy. This is a statement in the Encyclopedia of Islam, volume 4. But notice, this is a mistake based on the fact that it was mentioned by Bocart in 1646, and this is then assumed that Bocart was stating that Ptolemy said this. Ptolemy never made this statement. This was a statement made in 1646, so that's an error, right? So in the Concise Encyclopedia of Islam, we have this: little is known of the history of the Kaaba outside Islamic tradition. There is reason to believe that the shrine was an active pilgrimage site as early as the 2nd century. Now, let's assume for a moment that the Kaaba was an active pilgrimage site, but Mecca did not exist at the time. Then there was a Kaaba elsewhere, and there was a Mecca somewhere which was receiving pilgrims. So the geographer Ptolemy, and now we get something interesting. Ptolemy calls the city Macoraba. He doesn't call it Mecca, he calls it Macoraba, with the significance of Miqrab, or temple. The Miqrab in Islam is a prayer niche like this. And notice, you can go through photos of prayer niches. Many of them have pillars for no reason whatsoever, but they all have pillars, right? So we'll continue. Now, Mecca, known to ancient geographers as Macoraba and to the Arabs as Makkah. We also did mention that the main god, the god, the deity of the Yemenis, the deity of the Axumite Empire in Ethiopia and of Yemen, of the Sabaeans, was Almaqah. So now this is a legitimate spelling of Makkah, because this name is used. It's Mecca is spelled as Makkah. And you had this god called Almaqah, and you had numerous temples to Almaqah in Yemen. And in fact, this god was then also part and parcel of Southern Arabian practice because they were dominant at various points over Arabia. The name Macoraba means temple in various Semitic languages. And they feel that this probably refers to the Kaaba. Now, if the Kaaba did not exist in Mecca, since Mecca did not exist, there's no evidence of Mecca in the 2nd century, then we do know that the Kaaba existed as Al-Makkah in Yemen. Now, a scholar called Glazer tells us that this name may have signified the same as the South Arabian or the Ethiopian Miqrab temple. Now, this is interesting that the word Miqrab is Ethiopian, and guess what is the world's oldest language? And no, it is not Sanskrit. I showed Thaddeus something recently. The world's oldest language which has had the least changes is Ethiopian. And the word Miqrab exists in Ethiopian. And of course, then if you go back into history, it would have referred to one of these temples of Makkah. Your thoughts, Thaddeus?
Yeah, well, a couple things. One, I want to point out that the Sabeans were long gone by the time the Quran was written. So the fact that the Quran talks about them at all is pretty interesting. If it had originated up in Medina and Mecca, that's kind of odd. It's not odd that the Bible talks about them because the Bible was written contemporarily with the Sabean kings. But it is odd that the Quran mentions them, and it knows about the great flood that destroyed the civilization even, which is a piece of evidence that suggests that it was perhaps comes from further south where people would have had a living memory of the long gone kingdom.
Right.
And then
That's fair enough.
we have a bunch of irrelevant comments from Alonzo, but I did want to point out one where he said that Saba means 7. So apparently he's saying that the Sabeans are the 7s. I don't know if this was his excuse why they circle the Kaaba 7 times. So
Saba in Arabic means 7, but the Sabaeans, yeah, well, we'll get to 7 in a minute. So let's continue. So now in Ethiopian, this was a Miqrab. The Miqrab was part of the practice of their pagan worship to these pillars, right? And now somehow Miqrab from the Ethiopian makes its way into Arabian, and it now refers to this prayer niche, right, with these pillars. I see a connection here. I mean, there's some kind of connection here. Your thoughts, Thaddeus?
Yeah, definitely. We're looking at multiple different independent connections between Yemen, Ethiopia, and Islam.
Right. So in modern Islamic usage, obviously, mihrab means prayer niche, but notice the propylon. We spoke of propylon, these pillars, right? These ceremonial pillars at the faux entrance, the fake entrance. This is a common feature of miqrabs. Miqrab being these Ethiopian temples. So in Ethiopian, it was a temple to the moon god, Makkah. And here we have these miqrabs as part of the prayer niche to whomever they are praying to. So bear that in mind. Now, within the Encyclopedia of Islam, we've got this. Of course, we have, aside from Muslim traditions, nothing is known of the history of the Kaaba. So the sole reason for presuming that the Kaaba was already in existence in the 2nd century is the mention of Makkah under the name Macoraba by Ptolemy. Now, again, this is a mistake. I highlighted that. The first written discussion of Makkah and Macoraba is 1646. So Ptolemy mentions Macoraba in terms of a temple, not in terms of Mecca. But here we've got something interesting as well. They speak of Abraha. The accounts of the campaign of Abraha, which may have been elaborated with legendary features, exaggerated in other words, also suggest the existence and worship of the Kaaba in the 6th century, but they tell us nothing of its appearance or equipment. Now, Abraha knows about the Kaaba. Now remember, there was numerous temples of pilgrimage very close to where Abraha went. In fact, Abraha settled in the capital of Yemen at the time, which was the capital where they worshipped Makkah, the main temple to Makkah, right? Or you could say the main temple of Makkah was where Abraha settled. Abraha was, let's talk about Abraha. Was he in Mecca? Because according to legend, according to Islamic legend, let's call it myth, he never got to Mecca. He never got into Mecca. He was stopped short of Mecca. So, but Abraha, also spelled Abraha, flourished in the 6th century AD. He was an Ethiopian Christian viceroy. In other words, he worked for the emperors or the kings of Ethiopia. And he was in Saba, Yemen, in southern Arabia. He was a zealous Christian, and he is said to have built a great church at Sana'a called Al-Qalais, which is taken from the Greek ecclesia, because remember they had some of the earliest churches ever built, and they had one of the earliest translations, possibly rivaling or even predating Armenian Christianity. So they converted at about the same time as the Armenians. So it shows you they had a Bible, they had a great church called Al-Ecclesia to compete with the Kaaba at Mecca. So already in that period, he wanted a church. Now, think about this. If Mecca did not exist in that time, he's building a church to compete with Mecca. And he had just conquered and settled in the capital of Yemen, where they had the great temple of Makkah. Understand? So what if it's not Mecca in Saudi Arabia he's competing with? Who is he building a church to compete with? So that's my question. Your thoughts, Thaddeus?
Yeah, of course, we're going to suggest that he was competing with the Mecca temple of Yemen here.
Of Yemen.
But
Yep.
I suppose that our friends might say, oh, you just provided us evidence that Mecca existed. Of course, this is only 50 years or something before the founding of Islam, not ancient history by any means.
Right. Now, so he repairs the principal irrigation dam at the Sabaean capital of Marib. Right. Abraha is famous for the military expedition that he led north against the city of Mecca in the same year as Muhammad's birth, about 570. It was supported by elephants, but the expedition failed, and Muslims believe that Mecca escaped only through a miracle. Abraha's rule ended in 575 when the Persian Sabaeans invaded the region and brought the Sabaean kingdom to an end. That's the common story. Outside of later Islamic tradition, there is no mention of Abraha's expedition, including from Abraha's own writings. Right? Now, African war elephants had not been used in the region for over 600 years. It is difficult to explain how Abraha would have gotten a hold of African war elephants in Arabia. And furthermore, Quran 105 appears to be appealing to traditions from the book of Maccabees and not referencing any expeditions on Abraha's part.
So this expedition didn't take place after all. I mean, think about how insane that would be to try to use war elephants in the middle of the desert. He's attacking, but not quite getting to the location of where Mecca supposedly is. And this is some pretty harsh desert, unless, of course, Mecca is not so far north after all. But it seems that it probably didn't occur at all. The year 570 being known as the year of the elephant is why Muhammad's birth is described in that year, because it is an important year. It has probably no historical basis. We don't know when Muhammad was really born.
Right. Correct. So there's a few things there. So there's a handful of questions to be raised here from research that says that look, that this cannot be legit. Okay. So now, white elephant. So the lead elephant of this elephant expedition was a white elephant. And the white elephant was known as Muhammad. Well, known as Mahmud, which is a contraction of the name Muhammad. And this elephant called Muhammad stopped at the boundary around Mecca and refused to go in. So this is not the story of Nelly the elephant. This is the story of Muhammad the elephant. I'm sorry, this is so funny. Sorry. Yeah. So Muhammad the elephant just discovered that today.
So Vilnius says that all smells of legendary development. And thinking of an elephant, I guess we now know what legends smell like.
It smells like elephant. Legends smell like elephant. Yep. So archaeological discoveries in South Arabia suggest that the year of the elephant may have been 569 or 568, as the Sabaean Empire overthrew the Aksumite-affiliated rulers in Yemen around 570. However, according to Muhammad Assad, this surah does not describe. So now we're talking about how they defeated the invasion of the elephants. Okay, the surah involved does not describe birds literally carrying small rocks. So this Islamic scholar, Muhammad Assad, references al-Zamakhshari and Fakhr al-Din al-Razi, and he says that the words used in the Quran, namely the stones of Sijil, denote a writing, something that has been decreed by Allah. He further explains that this decree by Allah was a sudden epidemic outbreak, a disease outbreak, which according to Ibn Ishaq of Sirah fame, caused fever, hasba, and smallpox, judari. This, Assad concludes, points to the fact that the stone-hard blows of chastisement preordained were not literally stone-hard blows from stones, but were a sudden, virulent epidemic due to the fact that the word for fever, hasba, primarily means pelting or smiting with stones. So this is a word with multiple meanings. In the famous Arabic dictionary, Al-Qamus by Feruzabadi, the word ta'ir can denote any flying creature, whether bird or insect. So, and in a Shia hadith, some scholars have placed the year. So in a Shia hadith, in Al-Kafi, volume 1, Imam Ali was born in the 30th year of the elephant and died in AH 40. Some scholars have placed the year of the elephant 1 or 2 decades earlier than 570, so around 550, with a tradition attributed to Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri in the works of Abd al-Razak al-Sanani, placing it before the birth of Muhammad's father.
So a couple clarifications here. There's a lot of chatter about how ridiculous the elephant thing is. And yes, this is a legend. The point is how this legend connects to the legends around Muhammad. We're not saying that this is accurate history by any means. Andrew Martin said that the stones was some kind of disease. And just to clarify, they're saying that the stones are a tablet on which Allah wrote a decree which caused disease. So they're not saying the stones are a disease themselves.
Yeah.
They're saying that
well, the word for fever can also mean pelting or smiting with stones. It has multiple meanings. Yeah. So there are Islamic sources that actually, the earlier sources seem to say that this was a disease that somehow instantly broke out and debilitated everyone in the army. But other sources tell us that this happened at least 2 decades prior to 570. And in fact, maybe earlier.
And then just one more comment here. Muhammad claiming to be a white elephant from the past fits with the boasting of Muhammad. I don't think any comment is necessary. I just found that funny.
Yeah.
To share it.
Yeah, a white elephant called Muhammad. That's so funny. So, guys, next topic. Haram, al-Masjid al-Haram. Okay, so let's look at the word haram. So hopefully I'll tie all of this together as we go, but I'm trying to fill in blanks and gaps that may exist and hopefully add to some of the work that's been done by others. So haram among the Bedouin or the Bedouin is a sacred area around a shrine, a place where a holy power manifests itself, and also specifically the sacred territory of Mecca. Okay, fantastic. All of these references you see here are references to the Encyclopedia of Islam, which is volume number, page number, and the B means column B. So that's 2 columns per page. Go to any of my videos, find links to Encyclopedias of Islam. So now let's look at the word al-haramayn, which is the 2 holy places, right? Haram, and then when you have 2 holy places, al-haramayn. The 2 holy places. Now, of course, al-haramayn is usually in Islam, Mecca and Medina. But occasionally, al-haramayn also means Jerusalem and Hebron, which I find really intriguing. Why would al-haramayn be Mecca and Medina or Jerusalem and Hebron? Well, those are places associated with Abraham. But in Surah 4, 125, in which Abraham is described as Hanif, it is stated in addition that God took him as a friend, Khalil. Hence, the later designation of Hebron, the alleged burial place of Abraham, as Al-Khalil. That's Encyclopedia of Islam, volume 3, page 980b. Now, let's look at this in the Encyclopedia of Islam. So we're talking about a scholar called Snukr Gronier, right? And he says, it is not until after the Hijrah that Muhammad, on the occasion of his controversy with the Jews, pronounced the Old Testament patriarch Abraham a Hanif and the first Muslim. So we've always been under the impression that Abraham is the first Muslim, and this has always been the claim of Muhammad. This is not historically the case, because this claim happened after Muhammad went to the Jews, and the Jews said, "Get lost, you're talking poop." Then he was very upset with them, and then he claimed ownership of Abraham and said Abraham is a Hanif and the first Muslim, and maintained that he, together with Ishmael, the ancestor of the Arabs, built the Kaaba, and he introduced the ceremonies of the pilgrimage. So Abraham, according to Snoeker-Gronier, became only at this point, after Muhammad was very upset with the Jews who told him to get lost, only at this juncture did he become the most important forerunner of Muhammad, because Islam was then able to claim that they were the religion of pure monotheism already propagated by Abraham, and he could now claim priority over both Judaism and Christianity because he owned Abraham.
And this is actually a good question to ask Muslims when they claim there's no contradictions in the Quran or in Islam, to say, who is the first Muslim? And I've asked a number of Muslims that, and they don't answer, because the Quran makes, I believe, 4 different claims as to who the first Muslim was. It definitely
Khadija.
claims that, definitely claims Muhammad was. It definitely claims Abraham was. It definitely claims Adam was. And I believe there's a 4th one as well, maybe Moses. I'm not sure.
And they say Khadija as well was the first Muslim. She converted first. You're like, okay. Yeah, I know. It's very confusing. So Dozeros, isn't an elephant associated with Buddha? Is Mahmud an elephant handler? I have no idea. I have no idea. So, yeah, that guys. Google is your friend. Okay, next thing. So
actually, before you go on, that's a good point. As amazing as Lloyd is of a researcher, he can't know everything. So I definitely encourage other people to follow up on things, do more research. And, if you don't want to make your own videos, then you can pass it on to us or whatever. But there's so much material out there. Every time we dig in, we find another line of productive inquiry. They don't all go anywhere, but they're all worth pursuing. So by all means, please do investigate that yourself and let us know.
Yeah, just so you know, I'm working through a library of almost 1,200 books when I do this. Okay, my library is about 1,200 books. So, yeah. Okay, now, haramayn from Arabic, right, is the dual form of haram, meaning the 2 sanctuaries, and is the traditional Islamic name of the 2 holiest cities of Islam, Mecca and Medina, but also refers to, and again, from a different source, Jerusalem and Hebron. So in other words, now you've got these 2 other places. So there's not just one Mecca, if you want to think of it that way. There's not just one group of 2 holy cities. But notice here this very interesting thing. Haram also means pyramid. And previously we had other words and references also to pyramid, which are related to Islam and related also to the Yemeni and the Ethiopian pagan religion, things derived from pyramid. And now once again, you've got references from these things to Islam, to pyramid, which is Egyptian. So I just wanted to make a note of that. Haram also means pyramid, okay? Because I have mentioned that in the previous show. So there's something there that needs to be pickled or teased out. So, unfortunately, your logo is covering my beautiful picture there.
Sorry, I can't change that. It's part of this StreamYard thing.
So now into a little bit of linguistics, right? So we're talking about the word mu, okay, which I just said mu, and that's why I have a cow with a turban, Muslim cow. And let's talk about some Arabic grammar. Now, the Sharia enables Muslims to bring their lives in line with the will of Allah. A Muslim is Sharia compliant, and the word Muslim contains in its Arabic meaning, its definition. The word mu is going to be important for us. The word Muslim in Arabic has 2 parts: the mu prefix and the triliteral root of the word Islam, SLM, which it's also used by salam, meaning peace. The root word Islam is a verbal noun that means submission. So when mu is prefixed to such a root in Arabic, the resulting noun means a person who does the thing that the root word denotes. Right? That's the importance of mu. Muhammad, right? Muslim, right? And so on. So the Muslim is one who submits to what you ask? Well, to Allah's will, which is the Sharia, which is Islamic law. Thus, a Muslim is by definition Sharia adherent, because that's what the word means. If someone claims to be a Muslim or converts to Islam or was born into Islam and does not apostatize, it is reasonable to conclude such a person is Sharia compliant at a minimum. It is tacitly implied, right? It is tacitly or implied, right, to be the case until demonstrated otherwise. The converse is also true. One who does not submit to Sharia, who does not adhere to this, does not meet the linguistic definition, at least, of Muslim. Sharia is defined and understood by Islamic scholars to be an all-encompassing legal, military, doctrinal system of government that features some religious beliefs. Some religious beliefs. It is binding for Muslims as the word Muslim dictates. Sharia includes a multitude of innocuous obligations, right? To believe in the oneness of Allah, to pray 5 times a day, to avoid eating pork, and also jihad as various forms of warfare to spread Islam. This is also a core obligation. Anyone who is Muslim by birth or conversion are obligated to actively support the establishment of a universal governmental system, right, known as a caliphate or imamate, based on Sharia, and the replacement by means of jihad of any political system not governed by Sharia. So this commandment to Islamic supremacism is most problematic for non-Muslims, of course, and responsible for much of the debate about what exactly being Muslim means. But the answer lies in the etymology of the Arabic word Muslim itself. So the identity of a Muslim is one who submits, right? And unless they reject it, you have to give them credit for living a Sharia adherent life. So, but that's so a bit more than probably was necessary, but because we're going to get into this idea now in a moment. So, Macoraba and Muqaraba. Macoraba is easily derived from Muqaraba. I just added this little bit in here. Macoraba, Muqaraba, because this was written by someone who was Roman/Greek. So think about it. This is a westernization of this term Muqaraba. The Muqaraba were the priest kings of Yemen. And the Macoraba, as we know, is a place in Yemen close to where the kings ruled. Muqaraba are priest kings who served the will of the Allah, Almaqah, the god Almaqah. Now, under Islam, this concept was taken forward and became a caliphate or khalifa, right? You had the caliphate, and of course, you had the khalifa, who was the leader. And for most of the early part of Islam, the khalifa was the Amir al-Mu'minin, the Amir al-Mu'minin. This is the leader of the believers, but it was the military leader of the believers. He was the priest king, but also the priest military leader. So, from the Encyclopedia of Islam, Amir al-Mu'minin is the commander of the believers. He's called the commander because he's a military commander. This was adopted by Umar bin al-Khattab when his election as caliph, and the title Amir al-Mu'minin was employed exclusively as the title of a caliph until the end of the caliphate as an institution. Interesting. The leader of, or the commander of the Muslims, right? The commander of the Muslims is a title which the Almoravids first assumed in the 11th century. So the idea of a leader of the Muslims, of them as Muslims, came much later and was a minority position, because the majority position was they were just believers. Your thoughts, Thaddeus?
Yeah, when we look at the early origins of Islam, it seems to have been some sort of ecumenical movement, that it was accepting people from all different backgrounds, and thus why referred to its followers as just the believers. They're the believers because they believe in something, but they aren't necessarily all believing in the same thing.
Yep. Well, we'll get into that. That's my topic of probably my next video to look at. Just now, Amir al-Muslimin is a title which the Almoravids first assumed, in contradistinction to the leader of the Mu'minin, right? So the latter title, so the Almoravids recognized the supremacy of the Abbasids. The Abbasids they were the Amir of the al-Mu'minin. Now the Abbasids weren't the leader of the Muslims; they were the leaders of the believers. That's interesting. They didn't think of themselves as Muslims. So this smaller group, which wanted to distinguish themselves but was still subordinate to the Abbasids, they decided to call themselves, okay, well, we are the leaders of the al-Muslimin, while the major emperor, the major guy in charge, he is the leader of the Mu'minin, the believers. So they didn't want to challenge the Abbasids, and they didn't want to arrogate to themselves the title of the caliphs. The caliphs were the leaders of the believers. That's in a very unspecific term. Believing what, right? So these Almoravids were the leaders of the Muslims. Any comment? I'll just go on then for a while. Now let's look at the term Malik, and let's think of Abd al-Malik. okay, and the root Malik and Mukaraba, right? Let's have a look at these terms, how they all connect. So in the first millennium BC, the political leaders, so this term comes from 1,000 years prior to the year zero, right? In that first millennium, the first 1,000 years before Christ, right? The political leaders, the Maliks, the Malik, created a commonwealth occupying most of South Arabia. So the term Malik came long before Islam, like 1700 years prior to Islam. They took the title, the Maliks, so these political leaders of South Arabia, Yemen included, took the title Muqarrab, okay? Muqarrab, the Muqarrab of the Sabaeans. They were the Muqarrabs, the political leaders of the Sabaeans. The Muqarriban were the special retainers of the ruler, the envoys, the regents, the viceroys of the ruler. A Muqarrab in the Encyclopedia of Islam says is a unifier, literally a unifier, someone who unifies. In ancient Yemen, this was a sovereign superior to the kings. A sovereign superior to the kings. This was a man of great power who was a priest king, who unified. A unifying priest king who was the greatest. He was the king of kings. So your thoughts, Thaddeus? You're smiling. I'll let you go on.
Oh, yeah, I was just Alonzo is making some ridiculous points in the comments. I didn't think they were worth bringing up, but
Oh,
they did amuse me. He was telling us that the Bible contains the word Muslim, and it's translated as "He is perfect," which of course is not how language works. You don't just find a word that sounds the same and say it's the same word.
yeah. Well,
Oh, and then he claimed that we were attacking words that are found in the Old Testament because we don't know the Old Testament. Just to clarify, Lloyd, have you been attacking words at any point in this?
I've been using the encyclopedia, a few encyclopedias, in fact. So unless those I'm just quoting them. Unless the encyclopedias are attacking words, I'd say our guy is making up stories again.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just trying to look. He likes attention. He loves attention. He wants attention. He craves attention. That's what he wants. Just he loves attention. He's addicted to the attention. He does it because it feeds his ego. It validates him, right? It's validation for him.
Yeah, I wasn't planning on bringing it up, but you did ask. So
Right. So many impressive buildings in South Arabia were temples dedicated to pagan deities. So much of the important architecture in South Arabia were temples raised to pagan deities. And the earlier rulers of Saba, who bore the title Muqarrib, combined the function of prince and priest. Now think, Muqarrib, the Muqarriba, right? Muqarriba, Macoraba, Muqarriba, Macoraba. The two very easily flow out of each other. Now the Muqarrib, priest king, again another reference. So would this just be the plural of a Romanized Muqarraba, Macoraba? Muqarraba, Macoraba. What do you think that is? Do you think that's a plausible
yeah,
Latinization of?
it seems pretty reasonable.
Yeah, I mean it's not a stretch. They're almost spelled identically, right? If you want to think of it that way. So, right now let's have a quick look here.
Before
Now,
you move on, I think it would be applicable to point out the theory about how Macoraba became Mecca, or how Mecca became Macoraba, are far more exotic. They involve all kinds of, like, each person has a different theory, for one. And two, they
yeah,
involve like, oh, well, the Phoenicians came down and they founded just this one city. There's no evidence they founded any others, and this is based on a Phoenician word, and all kinds of crazy theories on how it could be Mecca. But here it seems pretty straightforward to me.
yeah. No, Macoraba, the source of the word Macoraba, because no one has ever satisfactorily explained how Mecca becomes Macoraba. The difference between the two words has never been properly explained, ever. Now you've got the source of Macoraba comes from the Muqarriba, and the place of the Macoraba is literally slap bang in the middle of three major temples of the land where these Macoraba were, where they had these temples to Mecca. You know, just like, okay, the Macoraba had temples to Mecca. Where could Macoraba and Mecca come from? Can't think. So yeah, I think it makes much more sense now. The word Ad, a written designation of succession left by a caliph from the time of the Umayyad caliph Abd al-Malik. Interesting. So Ad, joining together, unifying, a contract, right? Unifying, joining together. So succession left by the caliph Abd al-Malik, right? God's covenant with men, or Allah's covenant with men. And it says here, the religious engagement into which the believers, not the Muslims, the believers. What is interesting is that there's roughly 1,000 references to the believers in the Quran, the believers. There's only about 70 to 75 references to Islam and Muslims, but there's 1,000 references to the believers in various forms. So this group of believers was very important to Islam. They were believers, and that's a discussion for another day. So notice it says that the believers have entered into political agreements. So this is very much political, and a Muslim is someone who follows allegiance to a political system, as we mentioned earlier, right? And they have believers and unbelievers and civil agreements and contracts. So Ad is generally restricted to political enactments, land which has capitulated before conquest. So the Muqarriba, right, the Muqarrib, right, his job is a political leader who spreads the religion. Because he has to commit war. He has to do war, or enact warfare. So a land which has capitulated before conquest was known as Ad land, contracted land, right? But also notice again, once more in mysticism, it's the covenant and vows which vary in the different orders which the dervish is introduced into the fraternity. For some reason, there's always a reference to mysticism and some kind of occult practice whenever we talk about anything in Islam. It's crazy how often that happens. But I'll move on. I just wanted to say, look, these overtones of politics and warfare will come up constantly. So, Muqarrib, Malik, Almaqah. So this Muqarrib means place of refuge. The inscription placed on the wall of the temple relates that blah, blah, blah. And Muqarrib of Saba erected the wall of Awam, the house of Almaqah. Okay, so some Muqarrib erected the house of Almaqah. Then you've got al-Sabiqun, the foregoers, a term applied in Shiism to the Prophet, right? Imams and Fatima in recognition of their status as pre-existent beings and the first of Allah's creatures to respond to the demand, "Am I not your Lord?" So within Shia Islam, now, you've got the Prophet is a pre-existing being and the first to respond to the demand, "Am I not your Lord?" Okay? Alasu bi Rabbikum, the term derives primarily from the Quran, whatever that number is, that looks like 56, verses 10 to 11, Sabikun, Sabikun, Mukaribun. So this actually is within the Quran as well. We see this reference to the Mukaribun. There are also examples of verbal usage. How could we not be superior to the angels since we preceded them? Sabaknahum. So very interesting, just that apparently Muhammad is pre-existent. And, he's one of the Mukaribun. So, yeah, just thought I'd make that known here. Your thoughts, Thaddeus?
Yeah, we're starting to see the pieces coming together here. We're starting to see how there was not Muslims, there was believers, and how a political movement was uniting those people with presumably diverse backgrounds into one religion. One political force, which then later became one religion.
Yeah, because there was no diversity amongst the, rather, put it this way, there was no distinct identity. So what it looks like is that there was no distinct identity. They were believers, a part of an ecumenical movement that included Jews and Christians, or Jews and Christians of whatever, pseudo-Jews, pseudo-Christians, whatever the case might be. But at some point, they split off and formed a distinct identity. They had to separate, which is what they did. Now, South Arabia, led by a Muqarrib, a sovereign superior to the kings, whose name means unifier. So now you've got a unifier, and this is the name Karibili comes up again, right? So Muqarrib is a sovereign unifier. They speak of the temple of Almaqah, the great god of the Sabaeans in the center of the town, right? And you've got South Arabia, the kingdom of Sheba, the capital of Maghreb, was the leading state in the first millennium. So in that region, again, Mecca, right? Sorry, the Yemenis were the leading state in the first millennium BCE, right? Or BC. And of course, the tribal confederation was headed by a ruler who was given the title, the Muqarrib, right? Macoraba, right? So Solomon and Queen of Sheba would need to be, okay, also this is on Solomon and Queen of Sheba, but apparently there's a problem with the dating. So basically Solomon and Queen of Sheba would need to be in the 10th century. but the queen is not an otherwise attested historical figure. So in other words, the story of the Queen of Sheba must be somewhat mythical, right? So there's no reference to the queen in any Sabaean inscriptions, although the queens of the Arabs are cited in several 8th century Assyrian inscriptions, but no reference to the Queen of Sheba from any historical inscriptions, because she would have to have lived in the 10th century BC. So Macoraba to Malik. So now I've got Macoraba in Arabic. You've got the priest kings or federators. One, right? And in the 4th century BC, the title was replaced by Malik, Abd al-Malik. Now, Jay has spoken plenty about Abd al-Malik. Abd al-Malik, Malik, Malik, Malik. Malik means king. That's the term that replaced the term the Macorab. And the title of the ruler held primacy over the tribes linked by a covenant. And a Macorab is a South Arabian hegemon, head of a confederation of South Arabian shabs headed by kings, the Malik. So the Macorab is the chief of all the Maliks. It is clear that in the early 800 to 400 BC, political authority resided with one leader, a Malik, or king of his own ethnic tribe, appointed as Macorab of a council of tribal leaders. So the Macorab issued edicts that carried out decisions by the council and presided over building projects, ritual hunts, and sacrifices. Some of the most famous inscriptions record the military conquests of the Macorabs, who were evidently quite successful in confederating tribal groups through the rites of pilgrimage, and then using such social cohesion to conscript military forces. Now, does this story look familiar, Thaddeus?
It does.
Isn't this what Muhammad did?
Indeed.
Wasn't he drawing on an older tradition that pre-existed him, that he revived, that he resurrected?
That's what would seem to be the case.
So the template for Muhammad existed long before Muhammad as part of this Yemeni priest, warrior, king class. So
yeah, assuming that Muhammad is a historical figure and not purely legendary, he seems to have cast himself in the model of the military leaders that came before him.
he did. So he was drawing on, I would think, a pre-existing model. Now, if he took the military, he took the concept of federation, of becoming a priest king. Obviously, he put his own spin in it to obviously give himself some kind of distinction from those. But he was really drawing upon a pre-existing tradition. He was not doing anything new. He was doing what had been done before. So he could have stolen anything and everything from them.
And is not that the accusation that the Quran and the Sunnah seem to have to answer over and over again? The accusation from people who do not follow Muhammad saying, you're not doing anything new. You're just doing what everyone else has already done.
Fair points. Fair points. Yeah. Is there anything interesting in the comments on this? Because hopefully this is something that binds a few things together, fills in a few blanks. This is my first run through with this, so obviously, hopefully in the future I'll get better and clarify this. But anything in the comments that's interesting?
Unfortunately, a lot of people have taken up Alonzo's distraction and are criticizing his stupid statements.
Yeah, but he's trying to distract from what we're doing. So I've put him in timeout for 5 minutes because I think people maybe want to focus rather than be distracted.
Excellent suggestion. But those who are commenting on the material are saying this is very fascinating. This is very interesting. This explains a lot, that kind of thing.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So I don't want to go too much longer. So hegemon. Now they speak of hegemon here. Okay, South Arabian hegemon. A hegemon the meaning of hegemon is something such as political state. So understand, Islam is a political power. It's a political force. It's a totalitarian political ideology, not much different to communism, right? So they speak of these Macorabs were hegemons, having dominant influence or authority over others, right? A hegemon is a leading or major power, like the United States has long been a hegemon in world politics because it's a powerful country. Hegemony, right, is the political, economic, and military predominance of one state over other states. This is now the jihad, political, economic, and military predominance. You've got Sharia finance, you've got Sharia law, and you've got jihad. You meet all of these requirements of Islam being a hegemony, or attempting to be a hegemony, and Muhammad was a hegemon. So this again is a political state. So Andrew Martin says Muhammad taking power as priest king is very telling and agrees with the Quran subtext and Muhammad railing against his tribe's ruler. Yeah. Fair. I think that's fair. Now, so let's talk for a few minutes about Hubal and some of the kings. Let's get to some of the moon gods. So Hubal was a god worshipped in pre-Islamic Arabia. In pre-Islamic Makkah, there was a temple to the moon god Hubal. There are two Greek manuscripts of what's called the Periplus, which give the Latinized word Karib. The name represents a transcription of the Sabaean name Karib. Now, we saw this name earlier, Karib, and we saw Krb, Krb, as a root previously as part of the Macoraba, as part of the Karibs, the Mukaribs, the Mukarib. So a Mukarib is someone who follows Baal, is Baal. You see, now you've got Karabal means blessed by or following God. Okay, their god was Hubal, the moon god. Okay, and a Mukarib is someone who does what is denoted by the next word. So a Mukarib is someone who follows the god of the moon. Does that help to clarify? That is Macoraba, Mukarib.
Indeed. And of course, we see the name of the moon god is very similar as well. Not this one, but the other one.
Right.
I don't know what the next slide is. So
Okay, so notice it was a regnal name. Now, a regnal name is a royal name shared by South Arabian rulers. It was a common name. It was a common royal name, right? A title shared by numerous South Arabian rulers. It meant blessed by or following Baal. And then you've got Hu-Baal, 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 or huwa in Arabic, meaning he, right? It's a pronoun. It's a name of or name for Allah, for God, in Sufism. Literally, it is the Hebrew and Arabic for the English third person. It is used to avoid attribution of a grammatical gender to Allah. So Hu is something that is known within Arabic. Okay, Hu-Baal is a name you give to avoid the attribution of a grammatical gender to Allah. So Hu-Baal, he who is Baal, and the Karibal, okay, Karibal, the Mukarib is one who follows or blessed by and follows Hu-Baal.
yeah, definitely. So you have in there Baal. Baal, of course, appears a number of times in the Bible as one of the chief opponents of the worship of Yahweh. And this is actually a pretty generic name. It's basically the Phoenician equivalent to Lord. So it can be ascribed to a number of different deities. So don't think of this as necessarily the same deity, or the same conception of deity as what's found in the Old Testament.
Right. Yeah, true. But there's just these parallels. There's just these ideas that we need to explore. Look, I'm not saying that I've done a deep dive. It's just that these are things that need to be further investigated, need to be unraveled, need to be looked into. But I don't think, again, these connections can just be dismissed casually. There's something here that's...
And although Alonso is not talking about the same thing that we're talking about, he was making claims about how different words have the same roots and they must have the same meaning. Strangely, I don't think he would want to apply that same logic here, even though the connection is much stronger than the connections that he was trying to point out. Same root,
right.
Same meaning. Not always true, but worth considering.
Fair point. So now, huwa. Now, what is interesting within Arabic, okay, you've got huwa in Arabic. So the Sufis use this to mean, okay, the third person name for their god. Okay, it's like the tetragrammaton, right, that the Jews use. But notice, huwa in Arabic literally means an itinerant mountebank. In other words, a con man.
Now this one I'm sure is just a coincidence, but it's a humorous coincidence nonetheless.
Well, huwa, the exact same word, means in Arabic a con man, a snake charmer, or a con man.
So
Mountebank
Alonso is telling
man.
us because there's coincidental sounding things in Hebrew that they mean the same thing as what Muslims believe. Well, if that's the case, then apparently
Allah's a con man.
yeah, apparently Allah is a con man.
Yeah, facts. Yeah, so that, I mean, just really, really odd. Okay, so he's a con man. Okay, so maybe I'll finish up here, guys. Don't want to go longer than 90 minutes in total. I don't want to rush, but I also... So Daus had an idol belonging to Amr bin Humama, blah, blah, blah. The Quraysh had an idol by a well in the middle of the Kaaba called Hubal. I always knew Allah was a snake. Well, yeah, snake charmer, yeah, con man, yeah, snake charmers are con men, and yeah, there you go. So now, guys, the Quraysh had a well in the middle of the Kaaba called Hu-Baal, had an idol by a well called Hu-Baal. Abdul Muttalib, okay, the Quraysh claimed that blah blah blah. Abdul Muttalib denied this, but was willing to submit the matter to sacred Lot. He would make 2 arrows for the Kaaba, 2 for them, and the arrows, blah blah blah. Okay. So they were then given the priest in charge of the arrows. They were thrown beside Hu-Baal. Hu-Baal was an image in the middle of the Kaaba, indeed the greatest of their images. So we know that the pagans worshipped Hu-Baal. It is that referred to by Abu Sufyan ibn Harb at the Battle of Uhud when he cried, "Arise, Hu-Baal, make your religion victorious." In other words, they were crying, "Hu-Baal, Hu Akbar." That was the cry of, so, thank you, End Times, very much appreciated. Okay, so now we know that Hu-Baal was the chief god of the Kaaba. Fine and well. So Abdul Muttalib was praying to Allah, but notice it says here, this is in Ibn Hisham. Abdul Muttalib was praying to Allah. So Allah goes way back. Allah then happened to be Hu-Baal, apparently. Then they brought me Abdullah and 10 camels while Abdul Muttalib stood by Hu-Baal praying to Allah. So now they are praying to Allah. So okay, fine and well. So Allah, right? Then Hu-Baal was in the middle of the Kaaba. The statue of Hu-Baal stood by a well there. Okay. Besides Hu-Baal, so there's lots of references, but Abdullah was Abdul Muttalib's favorite son. He was the father of the apostle of Allah. Abdul Muttalib stood by Hu-Baal praying to Allah. Okay, fine. We're getting the point here. Hu-Baal was the greatest and most revered of the idols of the Quraysh in Mecca. Okay. And if they wanted to circumcise a boy or make a marriage or bury a body or doubted, they took him to Hu-Baal. Okay, excellent. So Muhammad is born, and Abdul Muttalib takes Muhammad before Hu-Baal in the middle of the Kaaba, where he stood and prayed to Allah, thanking Allah for the gift of Muhammad. Then he took him back, delivered him to his mother, and tried to find foster mothers for him, and his foster mother was Ethiopian. So Muhammad was consecrated, according to the Islamic sources, to Hu-Baal. Muhammad was basically baptized to Hu-Baal by his grandfather. There's numerous references to this. We'll go through a few, but Muslims want to claim that this is anything but the case. Muhammad worshipped Hu-Baal. Muhammad was a pagan prior to becoming a prophet. They want to claim Muhammad was pure and a Muslim at birth already.
Of course. I mean, he's the pre-existing deity of Islam, right? So, of course, he was perfect at birth.
Yeah. So that's what they want to claim. So now, Zayd bin Amr stayed as he was. He accepted neither Judaism nor Christianity. He abandoned the religion of his people, abstained from idols, animals that had died, blood, and things offered to idols. This is copied straight from the Bible. This comes out of also Jewish tradition. These are directly taken from the 7 laws of Noah, right? The Noahide laws, for those who are conspiracy theorists, right? So just an interesting point. Zayd was not one of you. Zayd, not one of you follows. So Zayd says, not one of you follows the religion of Abraham, but I. Okay? Not one of you follows the religion of Abraham, but I. So Zayd now claims he follows the religion of Abraham. Am I to worship one Lord or 1,000? If there are as many as you claim, I renounce Alat and Al-Uzza and her 2 daughters. I will not worship Hu-Baal, though he was our Lord in the days when I had little sense. So the tribe worshipped Alat, Al-Uzza, and Hu-Baal. Hu-Baal was the father of these, okay? Hu-Baal is the father of these females, deities. So Hu-Baal was a 3rd century immigrant from Syria, right? Amir bin Luhay brought back to Mecca from Al-Balqa in Syria an idol of Hu-Baal. Others say from Mesopotamia, right? So according to Abu Zayd and others, idolatry is not directly opposed to Tawhid. Now this is just an interesting theological point. Idolatry is not directly opposed to Tawhid, since no one would be stupid enough to identify the creator with a piece of wood. So this is from an Islamic scholarship. Okay, this is proper scholarship, not the idiots in the comment section, right? He says the error of the idolaters is that they suppose that God has a form.
Interesting, considering that not all Muslims, of course, but many Muslims believe that Allah has a form.
Right, and that makes you an idolater. Yeah, and of course, if it's Gnosticism, then Allah has no form. It's just spirit. There is no form, and this would conform with that as well. That He's the monad. That He has no physical form. doesn't conform to anything that we believe in our world. So just out of interest, the Smithsonian tells us the Nabateans worshipped powerful female deities and built lavish shrines in their honor. Archaeologists were stunned by the evidence for the worship of female deities in the ancient city of Petra long before Islam. The Nabateans worshipped three deities: Alat, the goddess; Al-Uzza, the powerful one; and Manat, the goddess of fate. This is now Petra. Dr. Glenn Corbett from American Center for Oriental Research in Jordan said the Nabateans lived in Petra seem to have worshipped in particular the goddess Al-Uzza, who is simply termed the mightiest. Allahu Akbar, the mighty one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, a couple people in the comments are very perceptive. They knew where you were going. They had already brought up Alat, Al-Uzza, and Manat before you got there.
Yeah, so they were definitely present in both the north. Now we're talking Petra again. They were also present in Arabia, right? So if we play this, I mean, it'll talk about it. So I'm not going to. But were the women of Petra more important than men? It's a bit of a dumb thing, but it's written by Smithsonian, and it's actually quite interesting. You will see here that we're talking about, but their father of these gods was Hubal, right? Now the Quran mentions. This is the last set of slides I'll do. So we're going to talk about the pagan Muhammad from Arthur Jeffrey. Arthur Jeffrey is, of course, a well-known scholar, and I showed his work, what I did on his work on the number of words, the number of Islamic words, the number of Greek, Coptic, Ethiopic, and other words. I showed that list previously, right? So same author. Now the Quran mentions two prophets that it claims were prophets from infancy. Of John, we're reading Quran 90. O John, take the book with strength, and we gave him al-Hakam, the prophetic office, as a child. Of Jesus in Quran here, that while an infant he said, I am a servant of God. He has given me the book and made me a prophet. So John and Jesus are claimed to be prophets from childhood. Muhammad is not. This is why now Muhammad has to now outdo John and Jesus. And that's why within the Sirah and within the Hadith, suddenly Muhammad gets his mom has this blinding light shine from her vajayjay 1,200 kilometers to Syria and lights up the palaces. Right? Because Muhammad's light shines out of his mom's vajayjay when he's a baby. So they have to now compete with this.
Yeah, Lloyd and I did 2 videos on the deification of Muhammad, how the Muslims developed greater and greater claims of him over time. The first one is called The Muhammad You Never Knew. And I don't recall the title of the second one, Muhammad the Counterfeit Jesus, maybe?
Yeah, probably
so
that.
Check those out if you want more information on the fabulous light emitting from Muhammad's mother.
Yep. So now the first is from the Gospel of the Infancy, and John, of course, is in the Mandean Gnostic teachings. So Islam now borrows from the Mandeans, right? They borrow from known Gnostic sources, right? Now, Allah says to Muhammad, typo there, did he not find thee an orphan and give thee shelter, find thee wandering in error and guide thee? Quran 93, verses 6 and 7. Now, the words Dallan and Hadda make obvious that the reference is to Muhammad being found by Allah in a false religion and thus guided to the true religion, as all the older tafsir authors recognized. Muslims today want to make the claim that they mean that Allah found him lost as an orphan and then sent him to his grandfather's house. Okay? Because Dala or Dalila is error. I found you in error, Muhammad. Okay, so few details of Muhammad's domestic life with his first wife Khadija are preserved, but there is an interesting passage in the Musnad of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, one of the founders of the 4 schools of fiqh, right, which mentions their custom of evening prayer. In this tradition, a neighbor of theirs tells how he overheard Muhammad saying to Khadija, by Allah, I will not worship Allah nor Al-Uzza. By Allah, I will not perform worship again. But Khadija said, leave Allah and leave Al-Uzza. And the neighbor adds, these were the idols which Muhammad and Khadija used to worship and then go to bed. And that's from
very interesting
one of the
that Muhammad himself was an idol worshiper before he got his choking call.
Right. So then we may draw attention to still more conclusive instance of Muhammad's association with ancient pagan worship. We are given the words of a confession from his own lips that in his younger days he had sacrificed an ewe, a white ewe, to Al-Uzza. This is by Yaqut al-Hamawi in the article on Al-Uzza in his geographical dictionary. Okay, it has reached us that the Prophet made mention of Al-Uzza one day and said, why I made an offering of a reddish white ewe to Al-Uzza when I was following the religion of my people. So Muhammad made offerings to Al-Uzza when he was a pagan. So Muhammad was definitely a pagan involved in the pagan religion of his people. So yeah. So we read in the Kitab al-Badi, okay, of al-Maqdisi that according to the ancient authority of al-Qatada, the first son that Khadija bore to Muhammad in the Jahiliyyah was named Abd Manaf, or the servant of Manaf by Muhammad. Manaf was an ancient idol venerated by the Quraysh, and at one time was the most important divinity at Mecca. So, yeah. And of course, this divinity had some kind of sexual significance. So Muhammad's son was apparently called Abd Manaf, the servant or the slave of Manaf, and Manaf was a pagan deity.
Andrew Martin here says, most of Muhammad's life, he was a pagan polytheist. Then Muhammad removes the female deities.
Yeah.
And that is telling, isn't it? That Muhammad first attacked these female deities when so much of Islam is about de-elevating women's importance.
Yeah, true. So I don't know if I should finish here or go on. I just don't want to go on too long. I technically got only a handful of slides because I need to introduce a guy called Nabonidus. So tell you what, how about I just tease it for next time and I can continue next time and do more research. So guys, I've skipped over a couple of slides, but so now we know Muhammad was a pagan according to Islamic sources. He himself worshipped these idols. He himself worshipped these pagan goddesses, right? Now, now short version of what I'm going to do. This is the moon god. At one time, the crescent moon was the full moon. They had a full round disk. Over time, it became the horned moon you see here, this disk, because they seem to have introduced another god, the sun, Shamash, right? But there was a third god, the sun, the moon, and the star. But if you had a round sun and a round moon, there'd be confusion. So they needed to make the moon a crescent to distinguish it from the round sun. And then they had the star. You can see, going back to the days of the Ethiopians and the Yemenis, you already had this. Shams, Shamash. Okay? Al-Makkah, Mecca, was the moon god. Right? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but because I will repeat this next time, but this was the area controlled by a king called Nabonidus or Nabonidus. Okay, so Nabonidus. Nabonidus was the last of the Babylonian kings. Nabonidus, he glorified sin. Sin had many names, including Nana and others. His son, oddly enough, was Belshazzar, who you may have heard of in the book of Daniel, who saw the writing on the wall. Now, he lived 10 years in Saudi Arabia. He decided to, for some reason, who knows why, decided to make a home here in Tepe, in this region, 350 k's north of Medina. And he controlled this region. He invaded, took over, and settled here. And his major god, the god that he proselytized, the god that he spread. In fact, Marduk was the reigning god of Babylon at the time, and he decided that he didn't like Marduk. His mother was in Haran. She was a major priestess at the major temple in Haran. And she was the temple priestess to Sin, the moon god. And he became a convert to Sin. And he decided to proselytize Sin wherever he went. And he settles here in northern Arabia, not far from Medina. Yeah.
So you have been refuted here. Alonzo Harris says, Lloyd is full of it. The Quran clearly states don't worship the moon. So because the Quran says don't worship the moon, then that just throws out everything you just said.
Look, I mean, is this guy even worth a response? I mean, he's even worth a response. I mean, the guy's got an IQ in the low room temperatures, right? So
I will offer a response though. Yes, we agree the Quran says that. We also believe that the Quran was developed over a long period of time and added to by a number of people. It contradicts itself in many ways. It has many different theologies if you read it carefully. So yes, someone at some point when Islam had been fully founded put that text in the Quran. That does not, however, in any way negate that one of the influences of Islam, one of the religions it developed from, was moon worship.
Correct. And then also, interestingly, Tepe, where Nabonidus settled, was also known as Yemen. I'm like, okay, Yemen? Why is Tema in Saudi Arabia also known as Yemen? You know, because there's a little town down here, a little city, sorry, no, a little country called Yemen. You know, just really odd coincidence, just a really odd coincidence. And they were all moon worshippers. And he was a son-in-law of King Nebuchadnezzar, believe it or not. He's connected to King Nebuchadnezzar, strangely enough. His mother was a priestess at the Temple of Sin in Haran in Turkey, right? And these guys are mentioned. So also the word Yatrib, oddly enough, Yatrib, the old name of Medina, it appears in an inscription found in Haran belonging to King Nabonidus. He speaks of Yatrib. Now, what people don't realize is that there's a Yatrib in Iraq, north of Baghdad, 40 kilometers north of Baghdad. There's a Yatrib in Iraq as well. Just oddly enough, you know, just really strange. So final slide, pardon me. So he was the last king of Babylon. He was related to Nebuchadnezzar. He spent a childhood in Sabean, Haran, a major site of worship for the moon god Sin. Apparently, he was called the first archaeologist. He got rid of Marduk, and here he is. Now, this is something that I need to investigate, spend more time on. He's pictured on an engraving in Saudi Arabia. And have a look. Here is he wearing a wizard's hat. He's wearing a wizard's hat. He's performing magic with his staff. He's a wizard. Okay? Here is the gods that he worships. Now, he worships a trinity of gods. He worships a trinity of gods. The moon, the sun, and the star. Now, let's have a quick run through this and I'll call it a day. So, Sin, the moon god, is the father of the gods and also the god of wisdom, the hikmah. And he's worshipped in Iran until the arrival of Islam. That's another story in its own. All of the crescent moon flags, remember I showed multiple Islamic crescent flags, multiple crescent moon flags in Islam. All of those flags from Islam are traced to Sin, the moon god. The Muslims have derived their crescent moon flags from the moon god Sin, or Nana, from Babylon, right? The pagan moon god Sin. There was a trinity of gods. You can see here is the trinity, the star, the moon, and the sun. Now, within Islam, what we have is, if you look at this symbolism, remember the moon was originally a disc like this, but they needed to distinguish it. So over time, Sin became from a disc, became the crescent. Now, what happens is they've merged the qualities, the characteristics, the qualities of the moon god and the sun god were merged, and then the star was added to the moon to complete the picture. So the wing-feathered sun disk, Shamash, was the god of justice and morality, right? This merged with the moon god, and the seven-pointed star, sometimes you'll find 8 points, sometimes 7, is Ishtar, also known as the goddess of sex, love, and war. She goes by various names: Venus, Aphrodite, and the Canaanite Ashtoreth. So this guy was heavily present in Saudi Arabia, and he was proselytizing this all the way. And then, of course, you had the moon god, Sin, the same god in the south as well. So, and this is him with the trinity of gods. He's praying to, and he's wearing his little wizard's hat again. Moon, sun, and star. Your thoughts, Thaddeus?
I think that's a great preview. We'll pick this up again probably in 2 weeks. Don't take that as a definitive date, but I think that's what we're going to probably aim for, is doing this every other week. So that's a great little preview of what is to come. We still have a lot more material to explore. We have a lot more to look at, but where we're slowly building towards is Islam being founded as a political system that then absorbed a variety of religious ideas, changed them in some ways. So when Alonzo points out it's not the same, yeah, we agree. It's not exactly the same, but we can see the influence nonetheless.
They need to distinguish themselves. They had to make some changes. Now, oddly enough, I mean, he says there were no crescents before the Ottomans. I just showed crescents before the Ottomans. We just showed a list of a few crescents that go back to BC, you know. So, yeah, there were no crescents before the Ottomans. Well, so, yeah, poor guy. Poor guy. So what did you take away from this, the syncretization? Yeah, I mean, Islam is a concoction. It's a mixture of a bunch of different things. It's a huge mess of different things.
Yeah, I mean, you've pointed out quite a number of different links. All of them look plausible on the surface. No doubt not all of them are correct, but they all look plausible. They're all worth further exploration. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to put a final definitive theory on this is exactly how this developed. We're saying all these things are interesting pieces of the puzzle. They need to be considered. They shouldn't just be overlooked and said, this doesn't have anything to do with Islam because Muslims writing the history of Islam in the 10th century didn't mention these things, which is unfortunately what some in even academic scholarship and certainly all common Muslims tend to do, is they say, oh, well, this isn't part of our tradition, therefore it's false. You can't assume that the truth of the tradition to prove what is true. That's just completely circular argument. So, we're putting out a number of things. We want people to take a look at them. We want people to consider them. We're not saying everything definitely is an influence of Islam, but there's a lot of pieces that are compelling. There's a lot of things that bear your attention.
Right. Yeah, there's yeah, I mean I dig into this stuff, so I see connections where perhaps others don't, because obviously I'm more familiar with this and I understand some of the other material and some of the other implications. But I mean there's one reference I found where this issue of the believers, right? So there was this ecumenical movement, like a return to this proper monotheism. And this movement was open to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And there's even I heard a reference to discovered a reference to a church, for instance, a temple that had a prayer niche for Muslims, as well as a normal altar for Christians, as well as room for Jews to pray. So they were all praying in the same church. Now, this is very unusual, this believers movement, and eventually it looks like when the believers became Muslims, when they switched over to becoming Muslims, they were like, okay, we need a separate identity.
And Andrew Martin points out, and a lot of this is in the Quran if you read carefully. And indeed, if you carefully read the Quran, you're going to get a totally different picture of Islam than Muslims present. And that's because the Quran is the first text, but what Islam's really based on is mostly the layers and layers and layers of so-called scholarly interpretation, the Muslims saying that this is the way it is, and the Quran doesn't matter. The Hadith can abrogate the Quran. The scholar's opinion of the Hadith is more important than what the Hadith say. And the scholar's opinion of what other scholars say is more important than what the scholars say. So what Islam actually is far removed from the Quran. So if you look just at the Quran, you indeed see a lot of hints that this isn't what Islam started as. What you say for Islam now is not the same thing as what it started as.
Yeah, I mean, Muhammad says that Islam started as something strange. What the heck does that mean? And then you've got these hadiths where Muhammad wears the mantle of Yemen. If you look at the hadith, Muhammad wears the mantle of Yemen. And Muhammad tells his people that our religion is from Yemen, our knowledge is from Yemen. You know? So what was in Yemen? Well, the moon god Makkah. Right? So he says our religion is from Yemen. What does that mean in the hadith? That's numerous hadith that state that. The religion is from Yemen. The knowledge is from Yemen. So Yemen, were they Muslims? They were Sabaeans. The Yemenis were Sabaeans.
Definitely.
Yep.
Trinity Matrix here says the origin of Islam has distinct pagan moon god roots and then has implemented a plethora of other religious texts and ideologies and morphed into a vivid cocktail that is everything you want it to be. And
Yeah.
that last part there is especially telling because this is how Muslims decide whether something is correct. I don't want to use the word true, but whether it's part of their religion is whether it sounds good. The best sounding thing is the thing that's the most real. It doesn't matter about anything else. It's just if you want it to be part of Islam because it sounds good, then it's part of Islam. If it's embarrassing, then it's fake. That's pretty much how things are decided. And here I'm not just referring to, internet commenters who don't know anything. I'm referring to how the scholars of Islam determine things.
Yeah. You know. So Alonso is now resorting to insults, of course.
Of course, he doesn't have any actual arguments to make. So all I can say is, you're stupid. You don't know what you're talking about, that kind of thing. if we actually didn't know what we were talking about, he could show that, but instead he just has to spam insults into the comment section.
We have invited him on how many times? We've said, hey, come on, make your case. Come on, make your case. This is not a requirement for a debate. This is Joe Rogan has the world's most popular podcast. It's 11 times larger or 4 times larger than the nearest major news network shows. Okay, it's huge. It's huge. It's bigger than CNN. It's bigger than Fox News. You know, it's bigger than them combined. And so we're giving you the platform. Come on, present your evidence. Show us your evidence. But excuse after very weak excuse. You know, this is the chicken of Islam. So yeah, so there we go. So that's so what stood out for you, Thaddeus? I mean, anything? I mean, some things are. I would say, look, it's all everything is speculative. I mean, when I say speculative, I mean everyone else is also making speculations, but we're presenting evidence for this, and so now I'm trying to connect this to the South, Macoraba, all of these things. What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I think that the evidence you've pointed out, especially as it relates to the Al-Maqab temples, is very compelling. And I know a lot of other things that you've told me that you haven't had a chance to highlight to the public yet that also are very compelling. I think that there are quite, if there's one or two things we could say that's a coincidence, it doesn't have, it probably doesn't mean anything, but the number of things that you've come up with, that the Ethiopic words, the practices of the Sabeans being related to the practices of Muslims, the Quran talking about the Sabeans, the worship at the temples with a very similar name, the fact that and Ptolemy's city most closely relates to things in Yemen, not things in Saudi Arabia. So and various other pieces. All of these are coming together, and they're all saying, "Look here, look at what you see here." Um, and again, we're not saying that the people who are looking at the north are wrong. We think they're right. Uh, we just think that the picture's bigger. The origins of
Yeah,
Islam aren't one particular city.
and you've got a
It's not.
guy that came from the north, a king, literally settled right and slap dang in the middle, and proselytizing his moon religion. He came from northern Iraq, parked himself right in northern Arabia, and now he's slap bang in the middle, you know, bringing his stuff over.
We do have a legitimate question here. Balze
From
Get D
Basil
Blaster
Get
says,
Boston.
"What is the connection between the Sabaeans and the Mandeans, or the Mandaeans?"
Uh, so the Sabaeans and the Mandaeans. The Mandaeans are okay. So no, the Sabaeans and the Sabeans are two different groups. The first one you have there is Sabaeans, okay, from Saba, the Sheba, right? And the Sabeans are a much later group. They're like a second or third century group. They're an offshoot, I would say, of pseudo biblical Gnosticism. They're Gnostics. They're known today as the Mandeans, but they were known prior as the Sabeans. It is considered generally by scholars that the Sabeans became the Mandaeans, and the Sabeans were present in Haran in Turkey. They certainly were. They were all over northern Iraq as well. So yes, you did find them. They have numerous parallels with the Gnostics, and the Gnostics, of course, stole liberally from the Christians, from the Christian books. So they try to add their own spin on Christology. I mean, it's all fantasy, it's all myth. So no, technically no. The Sabaeans go back to, like, I don't know, at least 1,000 years BC. The Sabians come at least 1,200 years, if not double that later. I mean, so the Sabaeans go back to the 4,000 years BC or something, 2,000 BC. Time of Abraham, and the Sabians come in like the 200 to 300s or something like that. And the Sabians are very linked to the Alchasai. They were influenced heavily because if you look at the history of the Alchasai, which I covered on Ask Truth's channel, I didn't do that on my channel yet. You've seen that is. The Sabians are known to have taken the book of Alchasai and then modified it to their own purposes, as did Mani of the Manichaeans. He also took the book of Alchasai and he modified it to his purposes to make his own religion.
Yeah, as we move along, I think that you're going to see that there is a surprisingly consistent thread from the 2nd century through the development of Islam. So the 2nd century Gnostic so-called Christianity spreading through Mani, and then ultimately through other systems and to Islam. And
Yeah,
there's a remarkable thread of Gnosticism running throughout. Even some early Islamic texts flat out state that Islamic is Gnostic, that it's the inheritor of the Gnostic tradition.
yeah. No, the scholars make no secret of it. Basil get Blasteros, how did the Mandaeans and Sabians get mixed up? Simple, because the Sabeans and the Sabaeans, Sabeans, that's it. The Sabians and the Sabaeans, they just mix up the names. They're very similar. That's all. The Sabians and the Sabaeans. Mandaeans is the new word, it's the new term. They used to be called the Sabians. So they're a much later group. Okay, so yeah, so guys, that's it from me. Unless there's other questions and other thoughts, and so I need to get into this whole ecumenical movement, and for that I need to get into the work of a scholar called Donner, and I need to dig into that, and I need to finish this up. I also have to link in the other connections, all the hadith that reference Yemen. Right, then we need to talk about more explicitly the Ethiopian connections to Islam, from the linguistic, from the historical that's mentioned in the Quran and the other sources. How many Ethiopians were involved with Muhammad? What he learned from the Bible, which was actually available in Ethiopic at the time, written. Right, and yeah, so we'll end off with Yemen. So
Yeah, I end with this comment here from Gavin. Surprising how large is the geographic area from where Islam draws its sources. And it is surprising until you think about what Islam was before it was a religion. It was a system of conquest. And so they now had under their control a wide variety of land with people with vastly different beliefs. And how did they bring that all together? Well, they take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, a little bit from there, and mash it all up together and hope it makes sense. But if it doesn't make sense, that's okay, because it's backed by the military might anyway. So don't need to worry about whether it makes sense or not.
yeah, and I see that Alonso is asking me, what does Yemen mean? Look, everybody knows Yemen is an anagram for enemy. There you go.
It's about as valid as the linguistic fallacies he was trying to present in the chat. So there you go. So thank you all for joining us. Later this week, I should have out a new video which looks at the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan and what it means for the Christian church. Lloyd, anything you would like to announce that's coming up on your channel?
Oh man, I can't think of anything right now. I need to do a lot of research, so I just head down, nose to the grindstone, working on some of these things, and yeah, I'm just busy working on this. I'm also busy working on some of the Gnostic issues, still digging into that. Also, something I do want to start doing is short videos discussing most of the stories in the Quran are Gnostic. I mean, quite blatantly, they are Gnostic, or they're derived from Christian fables and legends, or they're derived from Jewish mysticism, Jewish legends and fables. So I want to go through at some point through all of the stories in the Quran, the hundreds of stories or whatever that's told in the Islamic texts, and show this one is stolen from the Zoroastrians, this one is taken from Christian myths, this one is taken from the Talmud, this one is taken from this Jewish text, this one is stolen from this Gnostic text. I mean, because once you realize that the Quran literally takes every single story from some pre-existing Gnostic or legendary source, I mean, you realize nothing's original. There's nothing original in that book. Nothing at all.
Absolutely. Just one last, we had some comments about how Alonso is pure entertainment, and then he proves his point by saying Paul was Gnostic. Thank you, Alonso, for that very humorous comment to close us out. Please do learn what Gnosticism is and how that's not remotely related to anything Paul taught. It's like you need to blame Paul for the corruption of Christianity. So you just ascribed to him any random thing, which is like exactly the opposite of what he actually taught. So thank you for your humor. We appreciate that, and we are hoping that you will one day start actually thinking and start realizing that you are giving lies, giving ridiculous theories, and avoiding the real issues. You're avoiding the real evidence that shows that Islam is false.
Well,
Um,
we did have a discussion where we should perhaps talk about the Islamic sciences and how the Islamic sciences literally teach deceit, teach dishonesty, and teach them how to debate in a dishonest manner using dishonest rhetoric based on specifically based on sophist tricks. We discussed that previously, so it might be something.
And thank you once again for proving your ability to spout out logical fallacies here, Alonzo. You say Gnosticism is not defined by your church. Well, thank you. We never said it was. so thank you for attributing to us a position we didn't hold. I guess some very bizarre straw man argument here.
Well, Gnosticism is defined within Islam, and it's specifically in the Sharia that Islam is a Gnostic religion. It's all over the Sharia. You can't miss it. So yeah, let's leave it at that. I went longer than expected. Again,
Yep.
I was hoping to cut it short, but again, we've gone much longer. But yeah, it makes it hard for people to watch this, right?
I hope, I think that the material is very useful, very valuable. I hope that people are following, that people are seeing that there is merit in what you are saying, and that they take this under consideration. And ultimately, that they use it to talk to Muslims. They use it to talk to Muslims to show the falsity of Islam, and then ultimately point them to the truth that is Christ. Any closing thoughts from you?
No, we'll be a whole night. So
Excellent. So thank you all for joining us, everyone. God bless. Have an amazing week, and see you again soon.
Good night, guys. God bless.